Ready to begin. Thank you everybody for coming for this afternoon breakout session. My name is Heather Worley and I work in SMAP, which is the Energy Sector Management Assistance Program of the World Bank Group. And we are housing the newly established energy storage partnership, which Fernando and I are going to tell you about today. I'll let my two panelists also introduce themselves.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fernando Cisternes. I'm an energy specialist with Asmap. And well, with Heather, we are co-responsible of the Energy Storage Partnership.
Good afternoon, I'm James Frith. I'm an associate at Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and I focus on lithium-ion battery value chain, everything from raw materials through to recycling.
All right, there we are. Okay. So we're really excited to talk to you about the Energy Storage Partnership today. And I wanted to first say a few words about what and where the Energy Storage Partnership sits. And it's in, as I said, the World Bank's Energy Sector Management Assistance Program. We are very grateful to the donors of SMAP who have encouraged us to pursue this partnership since we came up with the idea. Well, the World Bank announced a new battery storage investment program in September 2018. And as the discussions advanced about investing more in battery storage, we realized there will be so much learning as we try to move the battery storage market and the energy storage solutions to developing countries. What will we do to kind of leverage all of that learning and make sure that more of our developing country clients have access to it and access to it rapidly? And the natural place within the World Bank to put this partnership, and we'll say more about the partnership as we go forward. But first, I just wanted to say a little bit about this innovation incubator that we have in the World Bank that is SMAP. And it is where we do a lot of the technical assistance on some of the cutting edge solutions, but also some of the long-standing intractable issues that our clients in developing countries face. So we do a lot on access. We've pushed the envelope on renewable energy within the bank for the past decades, and on EE and on subsidy reform. But basically what we do is we provide advice, we provide technical assistance, and we help deepen the knowledge base on new issues. And our reason for being is the 800 million people that still lack access to electricity. And it is something that we've talked about over and over again this morning. And I think what Fernando and the rest of our team in Washington and in the country offices are obsessed with is how to get more of these solutions to work for the people who are lacking access to electricity, but also to address the fact that we need to see a lot more renewable energy capacity. And that has also come up over and over again this morning. So what we want to do is see how energy storage can help us reach Goal 7 of the SDGs and how we can address many of the challenges that we've discussed so far. So we all know that the wind and solar renewable resources are constrained by variability. That's come up. And we know that energy storage is going to be key. What we are motivated by in the Energy Storage Partnership, and we will talk in a little while about the 35 partners that we have, but what we're motivated by is how to take this market that seems predominantly focused on EVs, as we've discussed, and consumer electronics, and getting the battery as small as you possibly can. But how can we take some of that knowledge and some of the experiences there and then put ourselves in the shoes of a developing country client, someone who's running a utility, who has all of these numerous challenges and consumers to meet? How do we kind of make sure that storage is doing the right things and answering the right questions for those clients? So it's heavily focused on learning and dealing with some of the challenges that we know our clients are facing. And there are unique attributes for battery storage, which are labeled in this slide about the modularity and that they're universally deployable. But as we have talked about many times today, they're also very capital intensive. So what we looked at I want to give you a little bit of the chronology about how this energy storage partnership came about. When the announcement was made in 2018, in September 2018, that we were going to put $1 billion toward battery storage. And as I mentioned, we realized we would have to do a lot on learning. We started doing some market research with people who are working in the industry. We talked to every storage association. We talked to people like James. We had hundreds of calls. We had dozens of meetings. We had consultations in 3 cities. And we basically said to the industry, Do you think that this is a good idea, number one, to have a partnership where we try to connect some of the dots on what's being learned? And do you think it's a good idea that it would be housed, it doesn't matter where it's housed, but do you think it would be a good idea to focus specifically on developing countries and have that proximity to something like the World Bank and the energy storage and the SMAP trust fund? And we got, I think, unanimous responses from everyone in the industry saying, yes, if you could help shift the attention to developing country needs, that would be great. And we got a lot of enthusiasm. And we are now in the first year of this partnership, and we're trying to build on that enthusiasm and also start to deliver for some of our clients. So what we heard was we need to shift the market focus to look at sustainable technologies, looking at all the values that storage can provide in a system and the sizing tools, looking at regulations, which has come up again and again, and I was happy to hear the German Energy Storage Association here today, I don't know if he's still here, talk about what they're seeing on policies and regulations that are working, and what is the enabling infrastructure needs. And so what we're also doing is working with clients to help understand what are the various use cases in their system where storage can be a solution, and what's the capacity need to try to make it a reality. And we realize that we can't do this alone and that we need partners. And I'm going to hand this over to Fernando to talk a little bit about the working groups we've agreed with the partners. And I just wanted to show you this slide because, as I mentioned in the beginning, we are very grateful to the donors who have encouraged us to pursue this aggressively. And we are, as I said, really excited about the Energy Storage Partnership and what it will be able to help us achieve with our client countries. And I just wanted to give a sense of the 35 partners that I mentioned. We launched this in May at the Clean Energy Ministerial, and I think at the time we had 29 partners. And we keep expecting this to grow. And I'm going to hand this to Fernando to talk about what we are specifically doing with the partnership and also the 7 working groups that have kind of been identified as our priorities.
Well, thank you, Heather. So I'd like to give you a little overview of what's the scope of the energy storage partnership and the full breadth of all the activities that we are undertaking with our partners. In general, we are taking a global public goods approach to development of sustainable energy storage solutions in developing countries, and our vision is that these can be accomplished addressing some of the challenges that Heather outlined before on the right-hand side of the screen, but also building capacity in developing countries. This is something that systematically comes up in all our discussions with clients. Countries need capacity when it comes to designing and operating battery storage projects. Also, understanding emerging markets. This is something very important and something that we are trying to do by bringing vendors that are typically focused on OECD countries closer to developing countries so that they are more acquainted with the challenges that we find on a daily basis by operating in some of the hard environments that we usually find. Also, we are going to create opportunities to inform investments and policy dialogue as part of our engagement with World Bank countries. We also plan to facilitate access to project-specific information and country information. So disseminating best practices, case studies, and information that will bring developers closer to the realities of our countries. Also, we plan to create opportunities for new technologies to gain visibility. Typically, countries are not very familiar with other technologies outside of the lithium-ion space, so it is very important for us to bring these other technologies that were highlighted in the morning session closer to our countries so that they fully appreciate what the value is from all these alternative and not so well-known technologies. And also, of course, we will create opportunities for multilateral cooperation and for responsible innovation, creating solutions that are amenable to societies. One aspect that I would like to highlight here is a strong complementarity between the battery storage investment program of the World Bank, so these are the investment operations with battery storage, and the energy storage partnership. On the one hand, with our investment projects, we will have tons of lessons learned by simply developing and helping our countries with these projects that can be disseminated through the energy storage partnership as a platform to share that information with a wider audience. And at the same time, the energy storage partnership can inform World Bank operations with best practices on policies, on procurement, on enabling infrastructure. And it can also help to identify some sustainable battery storage solutions that could be deployed in World Bank projects. All right, so as Heather was saying before, our stream of work is divided in 7 tracks, and each of these tracks is addressing one of the challenges that has been identified as a major hurdle for the scaling up of energy storage in developing countries. I will start with the first one, which is how we can integrate energy storage in power systems. And in this working group, we have identified 3 activities. The first one is assessing whether current safety standards comply or are well adapted to the conditions that we find in many developing countries, in particular high temperatures and low capacity environments. The second activity is identifying cost-benefit analysis or methods for cost-benefit analysis that fully capture the value that energy storage can bring to power systems. And then the third activity is focused on warranties. So we will be looking at the existing warranties and assess whether or not these warranties are adapted to some of the operational regimes that batteries and energy storage is going to have in developing countries. The second working group aims to develop testbeds in a number of developing countries. We have seen that some of these technologies are going to behave differently under high temperatures, and we want to be able to compare what the performance is on a level playing field. So the host countries of these testbeds will be able to test these batteries and also disseminate all the learning that is made by testing these batteries or these technologies in the same conditions. The second value of these testbeds is developing local capacity to operate energy storage systems. The third working group is on testing protocols, validation and performance, and the main motivation for this group was perceived discrepancy between how energy storage behaves in real conditions and what energy storage vendors specify in their spec sheets. This discrepancy typically increases the uncertainty to investors, increases the risk, and increases the cost of the project. So the main objective of this working group is to investigate what are the causes of those discrepancies and come up with testing protocols that allow to bridge those discrepancies and make sure that the performance of the storage system is less uncertain. The fourth working group is flexible sector coupling. When I think about the difference between traditional power systems and decarbonized power systems, to me the main difference is that in traditional power systems, the role of OPEX is significant in the total cost of the system. If you think about a diesel power plant or an HFO generator, the share of OPEX is quite significant, way over 50%, 70%. And this is something that doesn't happen in a decarbonized world. If you think about solar, wind power assets, battery storage, everything is concentrated in CapEx. And what that means, the implication that has, is that we need to maximize the utilization of these assets to make sure that there is an economic case for the deployment of these zero-emission assets. So in some cases, we have identified that the power system use is not enough to justify the investment, and these energy storage projects could also be serving other different sectors besides the power sector. And by combining these uses, we can increase the utilization, decrease the average cost, and justify the project on economic and financial terms. The fifth working group is called the Centralized Energy Storage Solutions. This is basically supporting two decisions for mini-grid design: technology choice and size choice. This is extremely hard because there's a lot of variables and things to monitor. So what this working group will do is to develop a tool that will be accessible by everyone that supports precisely those two decisions. What's the right technology that should be deployed for a particular application, and how big the battery should be, both in terms of power and in terms of energy content. The sixth working group is on policies, regulations, and procurement. So this is precisely what has been discussed over the day. We need to guarantee the cost recovery of the asset, and this can be done in two ways. You can create markets that fully remunerate for all the values that storage can bring to the system, or in power grids without a market setting, you can create contracts that somewhat mimic what markets do in a competitive environment and provide the right signals and the right incentives so that the storage system behaves optimally and provides values or services that are needed in that market. And then finally, recycling systems and standards. This is something also that comes up in every single discussion. And it's
why we have James here.
Exactly.
As our panelist.
And there's two main activities within this working group. One, looking at recycling systems or recycling practices for every single battery chemistry. This is something that would be very important to consider when it comes to developing projects. Guarantee that those systems are in place, that the battery will be recycled after its lifetime. And then the second topic is on extracting rare minerals like cobalt and recycling them that might hinder the scale-up of batteries in the future once the volume increases. So those are two important things that we will be looking at under this working group.
Before you go to the next slide, I just wanted to make a point about these 7 working groups. So when we had our first meeting of the 35 partners, we had a discussion over a day about what are the topic areas that if we were going to have a collective effort, we would want to address. And these came out very clearly, these 7. But what was nice for us is we also had several partners, as you can see, say, we are already doing work on this topic and we want to commit to collaborating more on it, and we want to work with partners that we didn't even know existed or were working on this. So although we haven't, and we expect to have kind of status and progress in January and June because we'll meet twice a year, although we don't have work product on this, it's underway and we're already seeing the value of the partnership, connecting dots between organizations that hadn't known about the others' work programs.
Great. The point that I would like to make here is that SMAP has a really ambitious program to deliver on the objectives of the ESP and to bring sustainable solutions to developing countries with energy storage. So, as Heather was mentioning before, SMAP is supporting the secretariat function of the ESP. And we're also addressing challenges of scaling up by developing knowledge solutions globally. So solutions related to sizing, solutions related to recycling, policy recommendations, regulation, and standardized contracts. Well, as a part of the World Bank, we're also delivering country grants, and those grants are going for supporting future projects. So pre-feasibility analysis, making sure that the battery is adequately sized and that the location is optimal in the grid. Also, of course, fostering capacity building and knowledge exchange. Chandra and I just came from Singapore, where we had a knowledge exchange event with over 10 clients, and we had an opportunity to bring them closer to to some of these solutions, and by bringing also some battery vendors, some technologies, they can also have exposure to some of these challenges, so they have an opportunity to adequately tune their products so that they better fit some of the needs that we find in developing countries. And also we will deliver grants for implementing policies, regulation, recycling procedures, and also, of course, to buy down the cost of some of these investments. And finally, we will also be supporting this idea of testbeds to make sure that we have a sense of how different batteries perform under difficult conditions, and to build capacity. We have received interest already by 4 World Bank countries. They're very interested in hosting a testbed, and we're working with them to make it happen. So what's next? Well, we're working already to mobilize funds to deliver on the work program of the ESP. We will continue the research and development work program and capacity building with our partners and World Bank countries. We will be meeting next in Pretoria in January 2020. And during that meeting, we will have an opportunity to receive feedback on all the work that is being done and present some preliminary results. And our objective is that at the 1-year anniversary meeting in June 2020, we will have an opportunity to present some of these outputs. And finally, I would like to say that we are extremely excited about this initiative, about the attention and support that we've been receiving, and also about the value, enormous value that it can bring to scaling up sustainable storage solutions in developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando. So we brought James here today because we wanted to go a little bit deeper on one of the topic areas of the 7 working groups. And in a way, I was pleased this morning to hear recycling come up so many times, and value chain and repurposing, those concepts come up so many times, because although it's the 7th working group, that doesn't mean, you know, it's the least important. It comes up over and over again. And so James is looking at this issue at Bloomberg BNEF, and so we're very glad you could be here. So before we opened it up to the conversation and to a discussion, I thought we could hear from you on what do you think, what are your observations about the state of recycling now, and what does the market look like, and are countries prepared, which countries are, which countries aren't, what are some of the challenges you see, and maybe the kind of good news that you're seeing in the recycling/repurposing aspect of battery storage?
Yeah, definitely. And thanks to Heather and Fernando for having me here today. Always happy to talk about kind of lithium batteries and recycling the value chain. So I think we're kind of at the very early stages of lithium-ion battery recycling at the moment, and really that presents a lot of opportunities. We're not yet at the point where it's become a real problem, where there are batteries there that need to be recycled that can't be because we haven't got the technology there. And actually there is a lot of interest in how that problem is addressed. And, you know, I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned. Certainly, if you were to kind of look at the global picture at the moment and try and pick which country is leading the way, and kind of not even the recycling, but dealing with end-of-life lithium-ion batteries, it's certainly China at the moment. You know, they have very strict policies in place, particularly around how you deal with lithium-ion batteries from electric vehicles at the end of life. And what's kind of really interesting to me with their policy is that they actually specify that you should try and reuse the battery before then recycling it. So it's about, you know, getting as much use out of that battery as possible. And there are kind of lots of implications there. One is that actually you'll have a whole load of batteries that can be used for things like stationary storage after they've been used in electric vehicles. But also when you look at things like the carbon emissions associated with manufacturing batteries over their lifetime, if you can extend that life by kind of 10 years by using it in second life applications, those emissions, you know, are reduced drastically. So that's one of the kind of additional bonuses that wasn't initially meant to be addressed by the Chinese policy, but is. If we look to the rest of the world, you know, there's, I would say, kind of a lot of work that needs to be done in policy to catch up with what China's doing. Probably the second leading region would be Europe, but that's not because they've put a specific policy in place for electric vehicle batteries, it's because they have already policy in place around what you do with rechargeable batteries, full stop. And so this is somewhat outdated policy. It only accounts for kind of 45% of batteries that are put on the market being recovered. And while that might be okay for the small rechargeable ones that go into your TV remote or something, when you're talking about vehicles and stationary storage systems, which are containers the size of this room, when they come to the end of their life, you do need to have something in place to kind of really deal with that properly. And so I think we'll probably see countries like Europe specifying that you need to collect all of the batteries, and probably that there will be some stipulation around how they're handled, whether they have to be repurposed first or whether they can just go straight to recycling. There are, of course, other ways to address it. The US hasn't got the same legislation in place, but actually it's kind of, I guess, using a free market mechanism to try and address this. So they've, the government in the US recently put a lot of money forward to try and help develop new technologies that can economically recycle lithium-ion batteries. And I think that's, it's important to kind of point that out, because if you can recycle them economically, actually you don't really even need to have policy in place, because people will want to go and get those batteries and get the value out of them and put it back on the market. So there are a couple of different approaches that are coming there, but as I say, we're still at the early stages of the market, and I think there's there are a lot of kind of developments that need to come in so that you can recycle batteries economically. In China, they're developing new processes to do this. Really, the goal there isn't necessarily economics. I think it's more around recovering the raw materials that are in those batteries. This is something that you've mentioned, and getting those materials back out and putting them back into the lithium-ion battery value chain. And China's not the only country that's alone in thinking that this is a good idea. I know there are certainly a lot of interest from companies in India trying to assess whether they can import lithium batteries from other countries and recycle them so that they can then get access to these raw materials that actually they don't have any natural abundance of in the country. And India is a country with great ambitions. It wants to start manufacturing its own batteries, but to do that, it has to find these raw materials. So that's a kind of real push that we're seeing there. And I think it's it's also the recycling industry. I think there's a lot of kind of concern around what happens when countries lose their automotive manufacturing industry if they can't capture electric vehicle manufacturing, or even if they can, there will be less jobs. But actually, there will be more jobs associated with the rest of the value chain in those countries, and recycling is one part of that. Again, when you're talking about whether you recycle or you repurpose, there's actually a lot of work that needs to go into that. So you need to test the systems. If it's being repurposed, that often requires kind of manual dismantling, particularly at the moment when there's not standardization across packs, so it's very hard to automate it. And then if you're dismantling it and putting it back into a reuse situation, then you obviously need to put that back together. And then there's the logistics supply chains associated with all of this as well, getting the packs from A to B, and then if you are repurposing it, putting it back into a kind of second life application, you need to have trained engineers who are there and can put these stationary storage systems out there. So I think there's a lot of value to come from the recycling aspect of lithium-ion batteries, and it really is what's needed as well to kind of create a true circular economy. I think that seems to be the push that everyone wants at the moment. We don't want to have a kind of single-use society, just because the amount of waste that creates. And therefore, if we're transitioning to an area, a time when we have more renewable energy and we're trying to have cleaner vehicles, you can't then just dispose of the batteries at the end of that life. You need to have some plan in place to think, how are you going to deal with this? And recycling is clearly a kind of key part of that. And I like the way that the kind of the Working Group 7 ties into Working Group 3. I think part of the recycling problem is knowing when are these kind of volumes going to be available. And part of that is because at the moment, depending how you use your battery and depending what the supplier has said to you, you don't actually know how long it's going to last. You can have an estimate that it's going to last 5,000 cycles or 4,000 cycles. But again, as you say, the kind of conditions that that's used in, the temperature, the humidity, that can all impact on that, and that can, you know, reduce that lifetime. Or similarly, if you use it in a slightly different way, you perhaps don't kind of fully charge and discharge the battery the whole time, you might find that that system lasts for much longer. So I think having, you know, these working groups together really it does tie it all there, and looks at the whole life of the system and kind of addresses those problems.
So it's fair to say there's a huge global learning curve on this.
Yeah, I think
lots to be done.
I think there's a lot of learning that still needs to be done. You know, and there are some great kind of groups out there working on this, but we're certainly not close to where we need to be at the moment. And I think the perfect example of this is 18 months ago, the materials that are in lithium-ion batteries, mainly the cobalt and the lithium, were at very high prices. And actually, at that point, you could recycle relatively. You know, you could do it economically in, you know, certain regions of the world. Actually, since then, we've seen prices fall, and the result of that is that it's now not so economic to recycle lithium-ion batteries. And so there needs to really be a push in developing technology that can do it at a lower cost and you know, recover those minerals and encourage everyone to, you know, to actually want to recycle their batteries.
And I like the point you made also about systems and processes and jobs, because if we put ourselves in the shoes of our developing country clients, these are also things that they want to see, they want to share experiences about as well. I think, Fernando, you had a question for Jim.
What I hear about repurposing batteries is that the heterogeneity of these second life batteries is enormous. They all come in different shapes, in different sizes, and creating systems that are able to integrate all these different batteries is quite a challenge. I don't know if this is actually the main challenge or if this problem has been cracked already.
No, so I think it certainly is still a challenge. There are companies that are looking at how to address this. So, you know, as you say, you have different cell shapes and sizes. It's easy enough to look at them and kind of sort them visually. I imagine that, you know, there are people doing that already. I think what becomes more difficult is actually what the kind of state of health of that battery is. And that's something that you can't, you know, do visually. You have to actually get in there and test it. But, you know, there are people who are already talking about this, looking at sorting batteries into, you know, different categories of state of health and into different kind of designs. And once you do that and you grade them, it's actually much easier to then put them back into a pack together. There are, of course, costs associated with that. That's just one of the things we'll have to reduce, though, to kind of get there.
So I think we should open it up to some questions. And if there aren't any, we have plenty for Jason. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Johanna Kinman-Moore from Tier Fund. We're an international development agency working in 50 countries. I'm really pleased to hear that SMAP is housing this partnership and the focus on energy access and all of the working groups. I'd really like to hear more about how you're planning to expand energy access for 6.5 million people through this partnership, and how you measure that, and which countries are you thinking about making grants to. So would that match up to the top 20 countries that have the highest electricity deficit? And also about mini-grids, how much will mini-grids be a part of this? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we'll take a couple if we have another. And if not, we can, okay.
Thank you. I'm interested to hear more on your perspective on the how does this initiative links to other international finance initiatives. So my understanding is that SMAP, it's a very good gateway for countries to develop projects that later are presented to the GEF window or other sort of funding instruments internationally. So what do you see the profile of storage technologies fitting into these different potential sources of international funding?
Yes.
I think I need a mic, I'll probably manage. Question around the flexible sector coupling. Could you give an example?
Why don't we,
Another sneaky question, which is
right, why don't we start there and work?
it's a very straightforward one.
Yes.
Procurement solar was on the list of partners, but I don't see it here. Is that correct?
Yes, and I can explain that one, and then I can hand flexible sector coupling to Fernando. But so when we had this first meeting and we had the 35 partners, we anticipated that some of them would be kind of along for the ride at the beginning, but maybe not ready to volunteer work products. And that was fine, and we were happy with the number of partners we had, but not every partner raised their hand to say, we would like to do something in this first year. And our requirements were minimal: meet with us twice a year and participate in knowledge sharing. And as you do your work product, your original research, you know, do it under the auspices of all of us together. So it was just a matter of they were interested and are watching and I think engaged, but not quite ready to partner on a specific work product. And maybe we'll take the questions backward.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I can address the one on sector coupling. I can give you a couple of examples with energy storage. For instance, thermal storage could be used to providing heat, but also to provide steam for a generator. So that's one example. Another one that is coming up quite often is potential uses of batteries in electric vehicles. Like when they're connected at night, they could be used to provide ancillary services to the grid. So that's another example. But these are only two small examples. And to me, the potential for sector coupling, particularly in the future, when we add hydrogen into the decarbonization equation, could be enormous. And then you can find tens and dozens of them. There was also a question on access, how we are expanding access. Well, in SMAP, we have a group that is dedicated to providing access solutions and to designing mini-grids and to provide that support. So perhaps our support is more on the technology side and facilitating and bringing the right technologies to those mini-grids. Typically, these mini-grids have been using lead acid, which is very, very toxic. So we want to provide different solutions that could be more manageable and more sustainable in the long term. And at the same time, one of the challenges in mini-grids is duration. Typically, mini-grids have to integrate some form of diesel generation. So our objective is to minimize the role of diesel in these mini-grids. So if we can provide solutions that extend the duration of the combination of renewables and storage, we will be maximizing or minimizing the use of that diesel. And those are the kind of solutions that we are bringing to our teams and to our projects.
I would just add that the mini-grid team that sits right down the hall from us is very engaged in this work also, and have been guiding us on the types of knowledge products that should be coming out of this, and we're working together. So one of the people who in the SMAP team runs this program has said, this is the kind of paper we would like to be able to give clients. If you have a mini-grid for 100 people or 400 people or 5,000 people, what are the types of attributes you need to be looking for? And to come up with some sort of probably desk-based research that should be relatively easy to do, to say, in these settings, from what we've seen and what kinds of solutions we've seen on mini-grids, this is what you might want to think about in terms of chemistry, but the other attributes and size and O&M issues. And so those are the kinds of things that we are in constant discussion with. And although we haven't set a specific target to address those top 20 countries that you mentioned, our mini-grids team very much does have that and is focused like a laser on those countries. So in connecting with them in some way, we are as well. And I think I think maybe I'll go to Chandra for part of your question, but if I understood your question, you were asking about how we work together with other financial institutions to make sure that we're all kind of leveraging in the same way. So I think Chandra is the best person to answer that one, and fortunately we have him here.
forward, also we have a strong pipeline of projects, for example, in Nigeria, and Ghana that's developing, and in Uganda, so on. So we have that.
And Chandra, on the question about GEF and working from the gentleman in the back row on working with other financial institutions and how we would work together to try to access other funds. That was your question, right? How we're working with other.
Are you targeting the specific windows of financing apart from the World Bank organic type of work?
Yes.
Well, yes, to the extent that it is required, we are working with other sources also, including now, as you probably might be aware, the SIFs also one source of financing. SIFs are one sort of source of financing. Now that GCF is replenished, that could be other source of financing. And they, in fact, Yoon from GCF is right here. And going forward in the next replenishment, Access has been classified as a resilience measure, very thankfully, which means that it wouldn't be seen as a mitigation. It wouldn't be you wouldn't have to look at the GHG mitigation benefits and rather the adaptation side of it. So it would qualify for much softer funding, which is required in the case of to make the mini-grid business models really take off. Obviously, we have also worked with GEF in the past, and we also have other sources of financing.
So GCF already approved a project that was developed by SMAP, which is a industrial energy efficiency project in Brazil. I think it's a good way to collaborate together, and because we do not have a lot of funding for the technical system, and it's sort of ideal to take over the pipelines that were already developed with MDBs and other partnerships, and then we finance it, so we make the project happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you had the microphone last, because that's exactly, he said 5 minutes a while ago. I'm so glad it ended with you, because this is exactly what we would like to try to do with this partnership. The learning curve on all 7 of these working groups and all the aspects that we heard about today is so big, and we do need to work together across all sorts of boundaries and institutions to try to kind of do the best to get this stationary and off-grid storage to more countries. So thank you so much for mentioning that project and for mentioning the collaboration, because this is what we would like to do. And one thing we say when we engage with people on the partnership is that the door is always open. We are keen to have as many interested parties come to us and start to collaborate as possible. So thank you so much for coming today, and thanks for your time. And thank you to James, Fernando.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.